Welcome everyone, I'm Julie Hartman. Today we're going to be talking about Elon Musk's meeting with Apple CEO Tim Cook, an update on a possibly impending railroad strike, China's new police station in New York City, and my view on the non-political, non-woke problems with our American education system. This is Timeless. Today is December 1st, 2022. Boy, I can't believe that the year is almost over. And it is the second episode of Timeless. Just as a reminder, Timeless premieres on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And Dennis and Julie, my other show that I have with Dennis Prager, premieres on Mondays. So every week, you're going to be getting some great content. On Mondays, you're getting Dennis and Julie. And then the rest of the week, you're getting Julie. So welcome back. And thank you so much for being here. We have some heavy topics to discuss today, but before we get into those, I quickly want to discuss something light. Members of the royal family, that is Kate and William, the Prince and Princess of Wales, are in Boston today to promote their environmental innovation initiative called the Earthshot Prize. Yesterday, Kate and Will met with the governor-elect of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, and the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, and they had this kind of ceremonial event where they pressed a button which lit up the Boston City Hall in the color green for a ceremony promoting Earthshot in Boston. Last night, they also sat courtside at a Boston Celtics game, and I love looking at photos of Kate and William doing these engagements, and I'd have to say, Kate looked so tired last night sitting courtside at that game. I'm sure she's just like, can I please go home and get some rest? And the thing that I'm going to tell you now is really causing me personally a lot of pain. Today, Kate Middleton is going to Harvard, where I just graduated, as some of you may know, in May. She's going to be going to the Center on the Developing Child, because those of you who know anything about Kate Middleton will know that she's very, very interested in early childhood development. So again, this is today. I have texted every single one of my friends at Harvard saying, Kate Middleton is coming to Cambridge. You have to go and stalk her, skip class, skip your sections, do whatever you need to do to go take photos of her and see her. And Sean, do we have a map to put up? Yes, we do have a map. I looked it up, and this Center for Childhood Development is literally a 2-minute walk from my dorm. Yes, we see the map here. I think it says, oh, does it say 9-minute walk? Or is that drive, Sean? Either way, whether you're walking or driving, it's a 9-minute walk. Well, you know what? If you're me and you're walking fast, trust me, you can make it there in 1 minute. But the point is, my dorm is there at the bottom, Winthrop House, and you can see the Charles River. And I would have just had to walk up a few blocks and go to that Center for Early Childhood Development, or whatever it's called, to see Kate Middleton walk in. And this is kind of a big deal for me because those of you who've listened to Dennis and Julie, I can't remember if I've ever talked about this, but I think I have. I am a huge Anglophile. And I get this from my lovely mother. She is an even bigger Anglophile than I am, and we know everything about the royal family. In 2011, when Kate and Will got married, we all got up in my house at like 3 a.m. and watched her walk down the aisle at Westminster Abbey. Actually, for a time in our house, we had a cardboard cutout of Kate and Will. So we are big Anglophiles. And the thing that I love about Kate Middleton is that she is such an elegant person. That's part of the reason why I would want to chase her down and take photos of her. As a young woman, She is one of the people in the public eye who I respect the most. She doesn't talk to the media. She doesn't complain about the strains of her duties. She always seems to have a smile on her face. She sits up straight. She's always just incredibly poised. And she does her duty with grace and dignity. And we don't really see that anymore. People nowadays, it seems, are constantly trying to draw attention to themselves, either to how they've been aggrieved, or on the other hand, what an incredible job that they're doing with their job. And I just think Kate Middleton epitomizes that old-time, classic British sensibility that, again, I, as a young woman, really seek to emulate. So that's the light story I wanted to start off with, and I will certainly, after this show, go and text all of my friends to see if they got to see even a glimpse of my idol, Kate Middleton. Now, on to more substantive news. There was some speculation that Apple might try to deplatform Twitter in the wake of Elon Musk taking ownership of the company. But in a Twitter statement this morning, Elon Musk has cleared the air. Musk and Apple CEO Tim Cook met yesterday at Apple's headquarters, and Musk tweeted that they had a really nice meeting and that this idea that Apple was going to deplatform Twitter was simply a misunderstanding and that it was not going to happen. So I view this as great news. This is a big win for Musk and his supporters. And it's a really good sign that it seems like Tim Cook and Apple, at least for now, are not going to be swept along with this nonsense that having Elon Musk in charge of Twitter has all of these safety concerns. That's what the woke vigilantes are saying nowadays, that supporting free speech online could increase the risk of misinformation and disinformation and violence. During the previous ownership of Twitter, between 10,000 and 12,000 accounts were deplatformed because they supposedly spread this misinformation or supposedly incited violence. These accounts included, I'm sure some of you are aware, the Babylon Bee. Sorry, I just have to laugh. The fact that they would spread violence, the Babylon Bee is hilarious. So they were one of the people that were deplatformed because they were supposedly so scary. Donald Trump, obviously, is the most famous example of someone who was deplatformed by the previous Twitter ownership. Alex Berenson was deplatformed. Jordan Peterson, again, whoa, big scary guy, Jordan Peterson. And Dave Rubin was also deplatformed because he tweeted in support of Jordan Peterson. But despite deplatforming those people, the previous ownership of Twitter somehow thought it was okay to allow the Taliban and the Ayatollah of Iran to stay on Twitter, despite the incredibly misogynistic and anti-women policies that are practiced in both countries. Those who say that Elon Musk or other people who support free speech somehow pose a grave danger to this country especially fascinate me, because I just can't believe their lack of awareness about the hypocrisy of their position. The only reason why they can criticize free speech in the first place is because they have free speech, which allows them to criticize things. So it's this really weird hypocrisy and paradox where they are using free speech to tear down free speech. It's like you're standing on a pier with some wobbly pillars and you're like actively hacking away at the pier that you're standing on. It's the ultimate irony. On to other domestic news. Yesterday, I talked about a possibly impending railroad strike in the United States, and I'd like to provide you with a critical update on that situation. So as a refresher, there are 12 main railway unions who are involved in this story, and all of them need to ratify their respective contracts with their railroad companies by next Friday, December 9th. The membership of 8 of those 12 unions have agreed to their contracts, but 4 of those 12 unions have not yet agreed. And even if just one union doesn't accept the contract, there is a strong possibility that the other unions will not cross the picket line. So President Biden is very anxious about this, and he's using the government's powers under the 1926 Railway Labor Act to call on to Congress to try to force a temporary agreement on these 4 unions who have not yet accepted their contracts. Now, according to this 1926 Act, the government actually has the power to intervene in the business of railway companies because the railways are such an integral part of our economy and our way of life, so they're allowed to intervene in order to keep the railroad business operating smoothly. And so the update that I have to provide to you today is that yesterday, I believe yesterday afternoon, the House of Representatives approved 2 measures pertaining to this issue. One is to force the 4 unions that rejected the proposed railway contract to accept it. And the other is to add 7 paid days of sick leave to this contract that would apply to all 12 unions. So these 2 bills have gone to the Senate to be voted on. And just a few minutes ago, before we went on the air, the measure that includes 7 paid days of sick leave to the contract failed, 52 to 48 in the Senate. So the Senate said no to those 7 paid sick days. So what this means is that that measure will not be included in the contract. Now, the Senate still has to vote on forcing the 4 unions to take the contract, but that failure of adding in the 7-day paid sick leave provision makes it, I would say, significantly less likely that the contract in general will pass now and that the government will be able to force that contract on these unions. So this really puts the heat on because this congressional bill that would again force this temporary contract on the railway workers needs to be signed by the end of this weekend. Otherwise, companies that use railroad services are going to begin assuming that there may be a strike and behave accordingly. And as I said yesterday, this is a really important story to keep our eye on because should a temporary agreement not go through the Senate in time, this strike will be the first national railroad strike in 31 years. The last one was in 1991. And it will really affect the flow of goods and services. As I said yesterday, 30% of the goods in this country and 40% of the prepackaged food travels by rail. And a lot of passengers travel on commuter rail service. Now, what I find to be really interesting about this situation is the lengths that the Democrats are going to try to prevent these railway workers from striking. As I said, President Biden is extremely anxious to force a temporary deal on these workers. But the reason why people form a union is, of course, this idea of collective bargaining. You collectively bargain for wages, for hours, to improve your working conditions. And a big part of being in a union is a right to strike. And what President Biden is doing, despite his claims all throughout his presidential campaign and indeed during his presidency that he's a pro-union, pro-labor Democrat, what he's doing by having Congress force this temporary contract is that he's taking away the rights from these unions to strike. This happened before I was born, but in 1981, the air traffic controllers, a group of them, went on strike. And then President Ronald Reagan said to them, if they don't come back in 48 hours, or maybe it was 72 hours, but he gave them a time frame, and he said, if these workers don't come back to work in 48 or 72 hours, they will be fired and replaced. And Democrats at this time in 1981 just went crazy. They just thought this was so unfair. You have to allow workers to strike. And then Senator Joe Biden was one of the Democrats who was ferociously opposing President Reagan's diktat. And so these air traffic controllers very famously didn't come back to work, and President Reagan followed through on his promise. They were fired and then replaced. So my question is, as President Biden is again trying to force Congress to pass this temporary contract onto railway union workers, my question is, where's the AFL-CIO on this? Where's the American Civil Liberties Union? Where are university professors who constantly say, we're pro-union, right to strike, we're pro-labor? What about the editorial pages of the New York Times or the LA Times or the Washington Post or the commentators on CNN? Again, all these pro-labor people, where are they? Where's NPR? All of these people are supposedly so concerned with the working class and with equity. Don't they support the right of unions to strike? And as I said yesterday, I will admit to you that I am not the biggest fan of unions, especially teachers' unions, which we will talk about next week. But it does seem like these railway workers have legitimate concerns, and if they want to strike, I think they should have the right to do so. Now on to international and kind of domestic news. China has announced over the past few weeks that they are opening several overseas police stations in various parts of the world. And one has actually opened in New York City. Now, the Chinese Communist Party says that these overseas police stations are necessary to combat telecommunications fraud that's supposedly practiced by Chinese nationals overseas. And also, the CCP says that these police stations are necessary to provide vital services to Chinese citizens living abroad. Now, my question is, and I'm sure many other people are wondering this, isn't this the job of an embassy? Isn't it the job of an embassy to combat fraud or to prosecute or deal with Chinese nationals who are committing fraud or to provide vital necessities to people overseas? That's the whole point of a foreign embassy. So why do we also need a police station? Many people are rightfully speculating that this police station is yet another attempt by China to surveil us. Let's see what Merrick Garland, our Attorney General, has to say about it.
The government of China sought to interfere with the rights and freedoms of individuals in the United States and to undermine our judicial system that protects those rights. They did not succeed. The Justice Department will not tolerate attempts by any foreign power to undermine the rule of law upon which our democracy is based. We will continue to fiercely protect the rights guaranteed to everyone in our country, and we will defend the integrity of our institutions.
Even if this police station isn't happening in New York, even though it seems like it is, this is just a penny in the jar as far as the efforts that China goes to surveil Chinese nationals living abroad and people of Chinese descent who may not be citizens of China, but again are still Chinese. Now, the most famous example of this occurred back in August with a man named Jian Yan. Mr. Yan was running for New York's 10th congressional district for the U.S. House of Representatives, and he lost that seat back in August. And he was a vociferous anti-communist party, anti-communist candidate. And what happened to him is that earlier this year, the Department of Justice found out that there were these Chinese spies, these Chinese affiliates in the United States that were trying to extort Mr. Yan, and also some of them were even trying to plan a violent attack on him in order to scare him and prevent him from winning, or in the hopes that he would drop out of the race. Another example of China's extreme surveillance, I'm sure many of us are aware of this one, is TikTok. The parent company of TikTok is ByteDance, which is a Beijing-backed enterprise. And TikTok, I was reading this last night, has 80 million American users. 80 million. And what TikTok does is that it gathers and stores user data like browsing history, the user's location, their messages. Even if they haven't sent a message, TikTok keeps track of things that they were typing and possibly going to send. TikTok also keeps track of social data and financial data. I'm sure we all know that many of these apps can keep track of our credit card numbers, and they pass them along to the Chinese government. Yet another example is the use of DJI drones. Now, these are drones whose parts are primarily made in China because China has been very good in the past few decades at producing very cheap materials. And a lot of local and state governments and also private companies in the United States buy these drones. But about a year or two ago, the Department of Defense issued a statement encouraging people to not buy these drones or these drone parts anymore because the Department of Defense says that these drones collect high-resolution geographic images and facial recognition data, and again, send it back to China in the CCP. Surveillance, though, is just one of the many avenues of China's endeavors to dominate and indeed control our country. And what I find to be just hauntingly brilliant about China's strategy is that it's not overt. It's a bit secretive and backdoor and subtle, and they've really kind of pulled the wool over our eyes and infiltrated our country in ways that a lot of us aren't even aware of. For instance, I'm sure many of us do know about the staggering fentanyl problem in the United States. Fentanyl is the #1 cause of death in this country for people ages 18 to 45. It is 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine, according to the CDC. Fentanyl kills 175 people every day. That's about 1,200 people per week, which I calculated is the equivalent of a 757 plane crashing every 2 days or a 9/11-like event happening every 3 weeks. That is how fast and how many people in this country are being killed by fentanyl. And in the 2021-2022 fiscal year, which just ended a few months ago on September 30th, the state of Texas alone, under Operation Lone Star, which is the program that Governor Greg Abbott initiated in order to control the drugs that are pouring across the southern border. The state of Texas alone seized 342 million lethal doses of fentanyl in that fiscal year. I know I said it 3 times, but I want to reiterate, this is just Texas alone, which is one of the border states and one of 50 states in this country that have a huge fentanyl problem. In fact, the Attorney General of Montana said in a statement a few weeks ago that the #1 problem in the state of Montana is fentanyl. Now, Montana isn't exactly a border state. I mean, it is a border state, but it borders our northern border, borders Canada. So it's not close to the southern border where these drugs are coming in. And yet, the Attorney General of Montana said that it is the #1 problem facing their state because a tiny grain of sand, that small amount of fentanyl, can kill you. So anyway, I bring up this fentanyl crisis because, yes, many of us are aware of it, but what few of us are aware of is that China is actually behind the fentanyl crisis. China produces fentanyl and then sells it to Mexican and other Latin American drug companies who funnel it across our border. And that, again, what better proves their shrewd and kind of backdoor strategy of infiltrating us? I view this fentanyl crisis as an act of warfare. maybe China is not coming in with battalions and tanks and big machine guns and shooting people on the street, but they are sending fentanyl to people who are pumping it across our borders. And I hate to say it, but it's kind of a brilliant strategy on their part, and they are tragically succeeding at killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. Another component of China's shrewd strategy is by planting Chinese state-controlled media journalists around our country. And no, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is actually happening. There was an article that I was reading, I think it was in the Daily Wire or the Epoch Times a few weeks ago, and they profiled the leaders of the AAPI hate movement. I don't know if some of you remember, but there was this big story over the summer where they said that there was an uptick in anti-Asian American crimes. And a lot of newspapers actually said that this anti-Asian hate was white supremacy. But in fact, they ignored the reality that a lot of the perpetrators of the crimes against Asian Americans were in fact black people. But still, what this article did is they profiled these organizers of the Stop AAPI hate movement, and they found that a lot of them were Chinese CCP plants, people who the Chinese government sent over in order to spread anti-Americanism. Because what people don't realize, and it's one of the most tragic things, is that China loves this woke stuff that we're doing to ourselves. They're trying to undermine us, and they don't really have to do it because we're undermining ourselves with the wokeism. So they, by sending over their plants to spread anti-Americanism, they're just throwing gasoline and lighting a match on the already prevalent self-flagellation that we Americans practice. And finally, another shrewd strategy that China is pursuing in order to dominate over us is that they are buying terminals at different ports around the world. Not in the United States, but in other countries that we trade heavily with, like Israel, Belgium, Spain, Sri Lanka, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, most goods, just as background information, up until the 1980s, most goods were transported on crates. But crates are really small and they have to be unpacked, and it takes a lot of time to move them around. So what we did is that, again, in the 80s, we transitioned to transporting goods via these large containers. And so these containers go on ships, and they go on railroads, or they can be put on really big planes, and it allows containers to be transported fast. And so what China's doing is that they are buying terminals at seaports that get these containers. And it's, again, I hate to say it, but it's kind of a brilliant strategy because it allows China to, A, control the flow of goods. They can determine which ships get unloaded first and how those ships get unloaded. It also allows them, B, to watch or surveil the flow of goods so they can see what different countries are selling and what prices they have it at or what the quality of the product is. It gives them a huge advantage over economic information. And C, having these terminal ports around the world allows China to essentially have a military base. So these terminals, they're housing a lot of their soldiers at these terminals. They're allowing these soldiers to have a reprieve or a break from travel. And again, it's very shrewd because they can have a presence across the world and see what's going on. Now, all of this, the police station in New York City, Chinese affiliate spies in the United States, TikTok and drone surveillance, fentanyl, anti-American propaganda, and buying these terminal ports, all of this is to say that China is coming at us from every direction, and they're kind of kicking our butt. And I think the reason for this is that we, that is the United States and China, have such opposite approaches to our national interest. China aggressively and unapologetically pursues what's in their national interest, whereas we meekly and ashamedly do it. President Biden, for instance, a few weeks ago, begged the Saudis to pump more oil. And the Saudis originally agreed to do it and then went back and said, no, actually, we're not going to help you. We're not going to pump more oil. And this week, President Biden begged Chevron to ask Venezuela to pump more oil. Now, the United States is perfectly capable of drilling oil. In fact, we were the largest oil producer in the world up until 1965. And during the tenure of President Trump, he allowed us to become oil independent again. He reopened a lot of these fracking places to allow us to drill. And so it's in our national interest to drill. We shouldn't and we don't want to be reliant on these third world dictatorships to provide us with oil. But yet, President Biden, I'm sorry to say, is so meek and so afraid of the climate change people in this country that he will go against our national interest. He will not drill oil in this country, and instead he will go around, with his hands together and beg these dictatorships to drill for us. Do you think China would do that? China unabashedly does what's in their self-interest. They don't care about climate change regulations. They don't care about human rights treaties or obligations. They don't care about international law or anything. And look, I want to make it very clear. I am certainly not trying to praise China. I think that they are an evil regime. But I am trying to juxtapose the stark ways that we approach our national interest. We have one country, China, that goes so far in one direction and will be brutal and relentless about doing what's right for them. And then we have our country, which is unfortunately increasingly going far in the other direction, where we will subvert what is right for us in order not to tick off a woke mob. And I just want to ask the realistic question: which country do we think is going to prevail in the struggle for domination with these two strategies? Now, as the final segment of the day, I want to talk to you about the state of American schools. The problem in this country, I really think, starts with schools. And by the way, this is one of the biggest reasons why China is dominating over us. They are relentless in educating their population. They have their kids in schools all day, and they have a really robust curriculum of technological and economic information so that they are cranking out really technologically skilled people. Here in the United States, though, we take time away from academics and teach absurd, woke propaganda. Today, though, I want to talk to you about some non-political, non-woke parts of our school system that I think are also significantly creating students who can't think independently and can't think clearly. But before I get to my analysis, I want to arm you with some facts, some examples of this woke stuff that's going on in our education system. Princeton University has a class this semester in the anthropology department that is called "Is Free Speech Racist?" The description of this class says that far-right activists use free speech to justify hate speech. Again, Princeton or its students don't seem to understand what I said earlier, that it is deeply hypocritical and ironic that they are using their free speech to subvert free speech. Another example is that the Oregon Department of Education has stated that finding one right answer in math is white supremacist. Yes, this is true. I wish it were not. You need to go and read so many of these State Department school codes, because they have all of this just unbelievable woke stuff in it, like finding one right answer in math is white supremacist. Relatedly, the LA Unified School District, which oversees about 500 schools, has a Rainbow Club meeting every week for elementary students to teach them, among other things, about homosexuality, transgenderism, non-binaryism, etc. The Michigan Department of Education has a gender theory program which teaches students that the West, in order to oppress minorities, has created this horrible, false cultural idea that gender is binary. And the Department of Education in Michigan also teaches them this alphabet soup of types of gender or sexual identities that these young students could identify with. And the training code for teachers recommends that these teachers avoid gendered language like men and women or boys and girls. And this is really damning. They also encourage school employees to keep students' sexual transitions a secret from parents. Just as icing on the cake, and I could go on and on, but I'll end with this example, the New Jersey's Department of Education says that it will enforce disciplinary action onto school districts that don't teach its sexual education standards that impart to elementary school students that they can change their gender at any time in their life and that sexual orientation is fluid. Now, many of us, or maybe we don't know these specifics, but we're at least aware that there's this extreme, corrosive, blatant indoctrination that's happening in our schools. And many of us rightfully think that this is a principal cause of our societal ailments. But as I said earlier, I want to talk about the other non-political, non-woke problems that I think exist in our education system that create the fertile ground for students to embrace these woke ideas. The first one is that our education system in the humanities, especially, like history and English classes, they place a lot of emphasis on students' ability to criticize or critique things, to make an intervention. That's something that I was told constantly in my educative experience. And I remember when I was 13 years old, my assigned reading for the summer that I had to read before coming back in August was Salman Rushdie's Harun and the Sea of Stories. By the way, if you ever, I'm sorry to say this because I know Salman Rushdie has been through hell in the past few weeks, but if you ever want to read a book at the age of 13 that will guarantee that you hate reading, read Harun and the Sea of Stories. It is a mother of a book for someone that young. And so we got back to school and we led this discussion on what Salman Rushdie did or didn't do well in the book in my English class. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm 13 years old. I have no bleeping clue what Salman Rushdie did or didn't do well in Harun and the Sea of Stories. Now, of course, this was because I didn't understand one word of what he was saying, but more importantly, and this was something that I realized at the time and has really stuck with me, I thought, I haven't read enough literature yet to know if this is a good book or not. And as I went on in my years, and by the way, I just want to make clear, I recognize that teachers work really hard. It's very difficult to educate young people. It's hard to make this material palatable. I recognize that. But I do want to point out this idea of critique because as I went on in my education, a lot of my English essay questions were phrased in this evaluative but kind of nudging you towards critique way. So, the prompt would be phrased like, assess the extent to which J.D. Salinger succeeds in conveying Holden Caulfield as an unreliable narrator in Catcher in the Rye. So again, that's kind of nudging you towards criticize him and provide reasons why. Or another prompt would be, it would be blatant that they wanted you to critique it. It would say, critique Harper Lee's use of imagery in To Kill a Mockingbird. And this is, I just think this is a really sad thing to do to young people, because you first need to understand a book before you can critique it. And crucially, you have to know and appreciate what good literature is and what the authors do well before you can criticize them. We wouldn't expect, for instance, someone to be a music critic who didn't appreciate or understand music. We wouldn't expect someone to be a movie critic if they've only seen 5 movies in their life. So I just always thought that it was a bit odd to expect students, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old students to critique, things that they aren't even well versed in. So in my view, it would be so much more helpful if teachers would orient the classroom discussions, especially in younger middle school years, away from this criticism and critique and more towards questions like, why is this book on the list? Why is The Catcher in the Rye or To Kill a Mockingbird so important in the canon of literature? Or in history classes, instead of saying, analyze what this president, didn't do well, why don't we talk about what did this president do well? Or what were some of the best decisions that built our country? Because what happens is this critiquey approach in the classroom, I think, gears our thinking beyond the classroom, in life writ large, towards what is wrong versus what is right. And again, I just remember as a student just kind of looking to find something wrong in the book or something wrong with the way that the author wrote, even if I didn't think that there was something wrong with the book, because I had to write the essay. And this bleeds over into other parts of life. If we can just take a moment, let's look at the in vogue moments of the past few years, okay? So Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020 proliferated, and this idea that we had to defund the police. That was taking something that writ large was not wrong, that is the policing, and critiquing it, relentlessly trying to criticize and change it. In 2019, 12 unarmed blacks were killed by police. Of course, that number 12 is unacceptable, it's wrong. But are we really going to say that if in 2019 only 12 unarmed blacks were killed by police, is that really grounds to say that the entire policing apparatus in the United States is somehow deeply flawed and racist, and that we have to permanently upend and change it by defunding it? Another example of an in vogue idea is this gender theory stuff that's proliferated, it's not right that there are 2 genders. There's a spectrum. Now there's 38 genders. There's cisgender, there's schizogender, there's transgender, there's all these kinds of things. That's, again, looking for something wrong when there isn't something severely wrong. And so that's why I said earlier that this method of teaching, I think, creates the fertile ground for students to accept wokeism and leftism. Because what is wokeism and leftism if not a critique, if not making an intervention in society? Another misguided part of our education system that contributes to the unclear thinking among people, especially my age, is the emphasis that teachers place on novelty. In the classroom, original ideas these days are more important than rational ideas. So when you write an essay or speak up in class, oftentimes you are expected or encouraged to contribute something different. And even a year ago at this time, or a year and a half ago, because it's December, at the beginning of last September, I was a senior at Harvard and I was debating whether or not to write a thesis. And I remember I talked to a few advisors about it and a few people who had graduated, and all of them said the same thing to me. They said, the goal of a thesis is to make a contribution to the existing knowledge on whatever topic that you're discussing. And I just remember thinking, am I stupid, or is this just a really bad goal? Like, I don't think that I have the ability to make a contribution right now. It was just such a foreign thought to me. I thought, how can I do that? And then I went to the introductory thesis meeting that happens at the beginning of September. And the professor presiding over it, lovely woman, very sweet and supportive, but she encouraged, there were about 40 people in the class, and she encouraged everyone to go around and give a 2 or 3 sentence synopsis of what they thought their thesis was going to be about. And it was just riveting, because I was sitting there and all of these students were saying they were going to write these theses on these ideas that were just like seemed made up, or seemed honestly like they came up with like when they were drunk. I'm not even kidding. One of the things, that was common was, I'm going to explore the intersectionality of race, gender, and class in post-colonial Guatemala among transgender basket weavers. Like, it was just, everyone had these like super bizarre niche thesis topics. And I thought, why? And the answer is what I'm telling you. The answer is this novelty idea that we have to contribute something new to the field. So the way that people contribute something new to the field is that they they identify this like niche aspect of history that no one has ever talked about before. And again, I want to draw the parallel with you to say that this is where a lot of our in vogue societal ideas come from. Again, look at defund the police. It's a new idea. It's not a good idea, but it's certainly novel. Look at gender theory, the fact that there are 38 different genders. That's a new idea. That's novelty. Look at we need to eliminate the electoral college idea, or we need to introduce Puerto Rico as a state idea, or we need to suspend free speech idea. All of these things, they're new. And we are not taught in school, unfortunately, to conserve things. That as much as change and novelty may be good and necessary in some aspects of life, what's equally as important, and if not more important, is to take care of what we have and to build on the things that are good. Thank you so much for tuning in again to this episode of Timeless. It is such a joy being with you. And again, I want you all to remember that like a sculptor with a block of clay and the tools to form it, each of our thoughts, choices, and actions shape who we are. So let's think clearly, choose wisely, and act with principle and determination. See you all tomorrow, and thanks so much.